الطيبين الطاهرين. السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله. يا رحمة الله الواسعة ويا باب نجاة الأمة غريب يا مظلوم كربلاء. سيدي يا أبا عبد الله، لأندرنك صباحا ومساء ولا أبكين عليك بدل الدموع دما. يا ليتنا ثم يا ليتنا كنا معكم فنفوز فوزا عظيما. قال مولانا يا أبو عبد الله الحسين: إني لم أخرج أشرا ولا بطرا ولا ظالما ولا مفسدا، وإنما خرجت لطلب الإصلاح في أمة جدي صلى الله عليه وآله. صل على محمد وآل محمد.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
In this famous letter that our beloved Imam have wrote to his brother Muhammad ibn Hanafi, he wrote to him that indeed I did not rise to cause havoc or out of my own desire. Rather, I rose to cause reform or repairment into the nation of my grandfather Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. One question as Shia, we ask ourselves, and as any person who reads the history, why did Imam Hussain alayhi salam rise against the leader of his time? For we find other Imams, they didn't rise against the leader of their time. Only Imam Hussain, he's the only Imam out of the 12 Imams that rose against the leader of his time. So a question we would ask ourselves, why is it the case? Why was it only Imam Hussain, the Imam, that rose? And from there we ask ourselves another question. What did Imam Hussain gain through this movement? For if we look at it from a war perspective, purely war perspective, Imam Hussain was massacred alongside his family. He lost his life, his family lost their lives. In war perspective, they lost the war. So what did Imam Hussain gain from this movement that we commemorate every year and remember every year? What is it that he gained? And what can we learn from the things that Imam Hussain gained in today's age? Inshallah, in today's lecture, I'm going to try to briefly answer these three questions. So why did he rise instead of the other Imams? What did he gain? Imam. And finally, how can we learn from the things that Imam Hussain gained? After the Salat ala Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad. Yesterday, if you remember, we mentioned a very important point when we assessed the life of any Imam of the Imams. We said that all of the Imams, they implement the message of Allah on earth. And the project of the Imams is a continuous project. We can't really look at the life of one Imam without looking at the Imam before him or the Imam after him. To really understand a movement of a certain Imam or the decision they made, we really need to have an overall view of the previous Imams, because it's a continuation of one project. So to really understand the reason why Imam Hussain rose, we really need to take a step back and go back to the time of the Prophet ﷺ, towards the end of his life. We need to assess the nature of the Muslims back then, given that it was the beginning, or it was the beginning of the Islamic period. That's the first years where we had a full Islamic community. So it was still newborn. It was a new community. In the time of the Prophet ﷺ, people used to refer to the Prophet as the Prophet was the leader, both politically and religiously. So they used to refer to the Prophet in all of their matters, both religious matters, so questions about Salah, questions about Sawm, other questions, they used to refer to the Prophet. And in their daily disputes, because the Prophet was also the political authority of his time. So any dispute between two believers, two Muslimin, Muslim and a non-Muslim, and so on, they used to also refer to the Prophet. So people got used, this new Muslim community got used that whoever is leading the Islamic society is the person that we refer to in our Islamic teachings, in our daily affairs, in everything. In other words, in our deen and in our dunya, in our religious matters and in our daily affairs. In the time of the Prophet, this was really good, because the Prophet is sent by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, after the Prophet passed away, just like any society or community, when their leader passes away, most of the times there is a dispute of successorship. Who comes after? Who takes the leadership after the previous leader passed away? This is a very common dispute in all communities and societies throughout history. When a king passes away, there's always a dispute on who's the next king. When a leader passes away, there's a dispute who's the next leader. This happens at a tribe level, at a country's level, at a kingdom level, at an empire level. We can see such stories throughout history. There's always a dispute. Who becomes the leader after the previous leader passed away? Now, in such disputes in history, if we look at such disputes, usually if the dispute is between a character that has a moral standard and a character that has no limits when it comes to moral standards, they can use any mean to reach to the leadership, whether it's cunning, whether it's using some political tools. Usually the side that has no moral limits take over the side that is limited by their ethical standards. So after the Prophet passed away, we see that such dispute happened. And obviously Amir al-Mu'mineen is bound by his ethical standards. This is why, for example, we find that in one of the narrations, Amir al-Mu'mineen describing Muawiyah, what would he say? He said, "Wallahi ma Muawiyatu bi adha minni, walakinahu yaghdur wa yaftur." He said, by Allah, Muawiyah is not smarter than I am. But Muawiyah, he commits forbidden acts. He cons people. I do not do that. Yes, the power at some point was with Muawiyah because Amir al-Mu'mineen cannot use such means to gain power. He sticks with his ethical and moral standard. But similarly, after the Prophet passed away, Amir al-Mu'mineen, holding back with his ethical standards, didn't rise to become the leader. What was the consequence that Amir al-Mu'mineen himself didn't become the leader? What is the consequence that others took up the leadership? A serious number of fabrications to Islam in its early time occurred at that period. One could ask, what kind of fabrications? The first kind of fabrication that happened is usurping titles. Individuals would call themselves Amir al-Mu'mineen, even though they have no right to call themselves Amir al-Mu'mineen. So, another thing they usurped is the seal of the Prophet. Whenever